All right, let's dive in. This time we're tackling a topic that's been requested a ton. Conspiracy theories and secret societies. You guys sent in some seriously interesting stuff, and I'm excited to unpack it all.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area. We're not just going to be looking at the theories themselves, but we're going to get into the psychology behind them. Like why people are drawn to these ideas in the first place, and how they shape how we see the world.
Right.
Right. Oh, and of course, we'll be looking at some historical examples, some real, some imagined. You know how it goes.
And our trusty guide for this deep dive is, of course, Conspiracy Theories and Secret Societies for Dummies.
I gotta say, I'm already seeing some pretty wild stuff in here.
Oh, for sure. There's everything. You've got your classic Illuminati, Freemasons, all that. But there's also stuff about, like, Elvis sightings and even a whole society dedicated to onions. Who knew, right?
That's what I love about these deep dives. There's always something unexpected. But let's start with the basics. What exactly is a conspiracy theory? So at its core, a conspiracy theory is basically the belief that some person or group is working in secret. They're trying to gain power, wealth, whatever. It could be small scale, like, I don't know, planning a robbery, or it could be huge, like trying to topple a government. The key thing is that it involves hidden agendas and stuff that's kept from the public eye.
So it's not just about bad things happening. It's about bad things happening because someone is making them happen on purpose, in secret.
Exactly. It's about believing that stuff happens because of these hidden forces, right? Rather than just accepting more straightforward explanations. And it usually comes with a healthy dose of distrust towards authority figures.
Makes sense. Now, what about the term conspiracism? Is that the same as conspiracy theory?
It's related, for sure, but it's a bigger idea.
Mm-hmm.
See, a single conspiracy theory might focus on a specific event, like, I don't know, the JFK assassination. But conspiracism, that's more of a worldview, It's this tendency to see conspiracies everywhere, like they're around every corner, like some powerful group is always working behind the scenes, controlling everything.
So for these folks, it's not just one event that's suspicious. It's pretty much everything.
Pretty much. They see the hidden hand in almost everything, connecting events that might seem totally unrelated into this big narrative of control and manipulation. The journalist H.L. Mencken, he once said, "The most costly of all follies is to believe passionately in the palpably not true. It was the chief occupation of mankind." And for some, believing in these hidden plots and schemes, it becomes a way of life almost.
Wow, that's a powerful quote. It makes you wonder, why are people drawn to these theories in the first place? What makes them so appealing?
That's a great question, and honestly, one that researchers have been trying to figure out for ages. There's no easy answer, but there are some common threads. One is this psychological comfort that some find in conspiracy theories. It's easier to believe that bad stuff happens because someone planned it, right? Rather than just accepting that sometimes bad stuff just happens.
Yeah.
Randomly.
So it's like taking away the randomness of the universe, replacing it with order, even if that order is kind of, well, sinister.
You got it. It gives you a sense of control, in a world that can feel chaotic. It simplifies things, gives you clear villains, clear motives. And this need for control and order, it gets even stronger when times are tough, like during national crises. Think about the Red Scare, for example.
Right. Everyone was scared of communist infiltration. They needed someone to blame. Conspiracy theories provided a perfect scapegoat.
It's like saying, okay, the world is scary, but at least I know who the bad guys are.
Makes sense. But, I've heard the term cognitive dissonance thrown around in relation to this. Can you explain how that plays in?
Sure. So cognitive dissonance, it's basically this mental discomfort we feel when we hold two conflicting beliefs, or when we do something that goes against our values. Let's say you believe you're a good person, but then you do something bad. That creates conflict, right?
Okay, I'm starting to see how that could connect to conspiracy theories.
Right. So now imagine someone who deeply distrusts the government, right? They see the government doing stuff they think is bad, but they've also been taught to respect and trust the government. See the dissonance there.
So it's like a mental tug of war.
Exactly. And conspiracy theories, they offer a way to resolve that conflict. If you believe the government is secretly controlled by evil forces or constantly lying, well, then it all makes sense. You can keep believing the government is bad without having to deal with that internal conflict.
So it's like the conspiracy theory actually reinforces their existing beliefs, makes it easier to just ignore any evidence that contradicts their worldview.
Bingo. It's a way of protecting their beliefs and maintaining that internal consistency. But it can also be a dangerous cycle, because it leads people into these echo chambers where they're only exposed to stuff that confirms what they already think.
So it's like a self-perpetuating loop. The more you believe, the more you see evidence, even if it's not really there.
That's it. And that brings us to another big thing about conspiracy theories, the appeal of, like, secret knowledge. It's really enticing to feel like you're in the know,
Yeah.
right? Like you see beyond the official story and understand how things really work.
Like you're part of this exclusive club, one that not everyone gets invited to.
Exactly. And that desire for exclusive knowledge, it's especially strong for people who feel alienated or marginalized. Conspiracy theories can give you a sense of belonging, a community, a feeling of being part of something bigger. That can be really powerful.
I get it. So it's not just about distrust or the need for order. It's also about community, finding people who share your beliefs, who understand your perspective.
Totally. And speaking of communities, let's shift gears a bit and talk about actual secret societies throughout history. The lines between belief, ritual, and organization can get pretty fascinating.
Now, I know when we hear secret society, we imagine shadowy figures meeting in dimly lit rooms, plotting stuff. But what was the first true secret society? Was it just a couple of guys whispering around a fire?
Uh-huh. Actually, the roots of secret societies go way back, further than you might think. We could trace them all the way to ancient Egypt, to a group formed around Imhotep.
Wow, ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Imhotep was this architect, priest, physician. He was a big deal. Served the pharaoh Djoser.
So we're talking secret gatherings have been around for centuries.
Oh, yeah. And from Egypt to ancient Greece, these secret fraternities popped up all over the place. They actually played a huge role in shaping religious and cultural beliefs. Take the mystery schools of ancient Greece, for instance.
Mystery schools. Now that sounds interesting. What were those all about?
Well, the word mystery, in this case, comes from the Greek word myein, which means, like, to close, as in closing your eyes and mouth to receive secret knowledge. These schools were all about spiritual and philosophical teachings,
Yeah.
But they kept their practices shrouded in symbolism and ritual.
So they were like exclusive clubs for exploring deep thoughts and ideas.
That's a great way to put it. And they were big on secrecy and ritual. That had a lasting impact on later secret societies, for sure.
So there's a direct line, then, between those ancient groups and the secret societies we hear about today.
Absolutely. Over time, of course, these societies changed, evolved. We see this shift from those religious cults and mystery schools to fraternal organizations and political groups, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries.
So as societies changed, so did their secret gatherings. Makes sense.
Exactly. And here's something to keep in mind. There's often a really fine line between what we might call a cult and a secret society. Both have elements of secrecy, control, and they can both have a big impact on people's relationships. But there are differences.
I'm curious, what are those differences?
Well, cults, they typically revolve around a charismatic leader, someone with a magnetic personality and a very specific set of beliefs. They often try to isolate members from the outside world. Secret societies, on the other hand, they can be a lot more diverse. Different goals, different motivations. Some might focus on promoting certain ideologies, some on social change, some just on camaraderie and support. Think of those fraternal organizations that were popular in the U.S. back in the day, like the Freemasons, the Knights of Columbus, Odd Fellows.
Ah, yeah. Those guys, weren't they basically social clubs? With, like, secret handshakes and stuff?
They were more than just social clubs. They provided a sense of community, offered support. They often did charitable work. They played a big role in society back then, giving people a sense of purpose and belonging.
Fascinating. It's like they took inspiration from the past, right? Using symbols and rituals to connect to those ancient traditions. But what about the big names in secret societies? The ones we always hear about in conspiracy theories, the ones who are supposedly pulling the strings.
We'll get to them for sure. But first, there's one key difference between those fraternal organizations and cults that's worth pointing out. You see, cults, they usually demand total obedience. They want to control every aspect of your life. Fraternal organizations, well, they might have secrets and rituals, but they usually don't try to control your personal life to that extent.
So it's a matter of degrees.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that difference becomes really important when we start talking about those groups that have been accused of using their power for bad things. The ones on the darker side.
Okay, so we've talked about ancient mystery schools evolving into everything from religious cults to those fraternal organizations. But now I want to get into the really juicy stuff, the big names, the secret societies that are always popping up in these conspiracy theories, the ones that supposedly control governments, banks, maybe even the whole world, right?
Ah, yes. The puppet masters lurking in the shadows, the Illuminati, the Freemasons. They definitely conjure up images of power and intrigue for sure. But the truth, as is often the case, it's way more complicated than the myths make it out to be.
Well, let's unravel some of those myths then, shall we? Let's start with the Freemasons, often called the world's least kept secret society. Which, I gotta say, seems a bit contradictory. If they're so secretive, how come everyone knows about them?
Good point. And it highlights something important about the Freemasons. While they do have rituals and degrees of initiation and all that, they're actually pretty open about existing. They have websites, public meeting places. Many members will talk about being a Mason, no problem. In fact, they've been trying hard lately to debunk some of the myths about them.
So, okay, what about those degrees of initiation? What's actually going on in those secret meetings?
Well, there are 3 degrees: Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, and Master Mason. Each one has symbolic ceremonies and teachings. They often use allegorical stories, moral lessons. Think of it like a journey of self-discovery, but, with a lot of symbolism and allegory.
So it's like philosophy, ritual, and brotherhood all rolled into one. But how did they even start? Where did the Freemasons come from?
Ah, well, that's where the legends come in. The Masons themselves claim a long, illustrious history. They say they go all the way back to the builders of King Solomon's temple. Some even connect them to ancient Egypt, the pyramids.
Wow. So we're talking biblical times. Secret societies operating in the shadows for thousands of years.
That's the claim. But honestly, the evidence suggests a more likely origin. Those medieval guilds of stonemasons, the ones who built all those cathedrals and castles in Europe, they had their own apprenticeships, secrets, rituals, passed down through generations.
So it's this mix of history and myth-making.
Exactly. And that's what makes them so fascinating. And it's also what fuels so many conspiracy theories.
Right. Speaking of which, how did the Freemasons become such a target? What are some of the things they've been accused of?
Well, for one, the secrecy of their rituals. That, combined with the symbols and allegorical stories they use, it just breeds suspicion. People see those things and they start imagining all sorts of hidden meanings and agendas.
The allure of the unknown, right? It's a blank slate that people can project their own fears onto.
Perfect way to put it. Over the years, they've been accused of everything. Plotting revolutions, controlling governments, manipulating financial institutions, you name it. One famous example is Abbé Barruel, a French priest writing in the late 1700s. He claimed the Freemasons were behind the French Revolution.
Whoa. Along with, who was it? The Illuminati and the Jews, right? Pretty serious accusation. Did people actually buy that?
Unfortunately, yes. His writings were very influential, especially among folks who were already suspicious of Freemasons. And this idea that they were behind the revolution, it still pops up today.
Crazy how a single conspiracy theory can stick around for so long, even if it's based on, well, nothing.
It shows you the power of these ideas. They tap into deep fears, and once they take root, they're hard to shake. And the Freemasons, with their long history, the rituals, the symbols, they become the scapegoat for a lot of anxieties about power and control.
It's like they represent the whole idea of conspiracy itself.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that while there might have been some individual Freemasons who did bad things, there's no evidence the organization is part of some big conspiracy. In fact, many throughout history have been advocates for things like social justice and democracy.
Oh, and we can't forget the connection between Freemasons and Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet. That one's always intrigued me.
Right. It shows how history and belief can get tangled up in unexpected ways. Joseph Smith was briefly a Mason, and some historians think he might have borrowed from Masonic ceremonies and symbols when he was creating Mormon rituals. There are definitely similarities.
It's like ideas and influences can travel across time, cultures, blending and transforming along the way.
That's a great way to think about it. And it reminds us that we shouldn't assume direct causal links or give too much weight to one group or person. History's messy, rarely as straightforward as we might want it to be.
Okay, let's tackle a big one. The all-seeing eye on the dollar bill. Is that a Freemason symbol? Proof that they control the global financial system.
That's a perfect example of how a symbol can be taken out of context and turned into a conspiracy. While the all-seeing eye looks similar to the eye of providence used by Freemasons, it actually comes from somewhere else entirely. It was first proposed by Pierre-Eugène du Cimetière, an artist, as a symbol of divine providence watching over the newly formed nation. God's watchful eye.
So the Founding Fathers adopted it, meant to represent a benevolent deity overseeing America. Not the Freemasons at all.
Exactly. It's about God, not some Masonic conspiracy. But the fact that so many people believe it shows you the power of symbols, how they can be twisted to fit a narrative.
It's a reminder that we got to be critical thinkers, question what we see and hear, especially when it comes to symbols and their supposed meanings.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, we've gone pretty deep into Freemason territory. Their history, rituals, role in conspiracy theories. What about that other big name that always comes up? The Illuminati.
Ah, the Illuminati. Now that's a name that sparks the imagination, doesn't it? A group shrouded in mystery, pulling the strings from the shadows. But, like the Freemasons, the reality is way more complex and a lot less powerful, frankly, than the myths would have us believe.
Okay, let's separate fact from fiction then. Where did they actually come from? Were they always this shadowy, world-dominating force?
The Illuminati that we usually hear about, the one in all the conspiracy theories, it was actually a very short-lived group, founded in Bavaria in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt, a university professor.
Bavaria, so we're talking Germany.
Yep. And Weishaupt, he was heavily influenced by the Enlightenment, the emphasis on reason, science, individual liberty.
So they were a product of their time, born out of intellectual and social change.
Exactly. Weishaupt wanted to create a society that promoted enlightenment and reason. He wanted to challenge the power of the church, the aristocracy, promote a more just society.
That sounds pretty idealistic, actually. Not exactly the image of a group plotting to take over the world.
Right. They were more like a philosophical discussion group, really, attracting intellectuals, free thinkers, even some Freemasons. They wanted to spread knowledge and push for social reform.
So how did they go from discussing philosophy to becoming the villains in so many conspiracy theories?
Well, their name, for one thing, Illuminati, implies, like, special knowledge. And that's always alluring, right? It plays into that desire to be in the know.
Makes sense. Feeling like you have access to something most people don't.
Right. And ironically, their downfall was also because of secrecy. The Bavarian government outlawed secret societies in 1785. The Illuminatis were forced to disband. Their whole run lasted less than a decade.
Less than 10 years. It seems kind of anticlimactic for a group that supposedly controls the world.
You'd think.
Yeah.
But even though they were short-lived, those seeds of conspiracy, they were already planted. Remember Abbé Beruel, that French priest who blamed the Freemasons for the revolution? Well, he also pointed the finger at the Illuminati, said they went underground and were still plotting.
So their demise became part of the myth. Makes them even more mysterious.
Precisely. As we moved into the 19th century, the Illuminati kept popping up in all these conspiracy theories. They became this shadowy organization controlling everything. Assassinations, financial crises, even the rise of popular music. They became the ultimate bogeyman.
It's kind of amazing how a group that barely existed could have such a huge impact on conspiracy theories.
It shows the power of ideas, how they can get distorted and blown out of proportion. But let's not forget, within the realm of secret societies, there have been groups dedicated to a very specific and chilling purpose: assassination.
Okay, now we're getting into some dark territory. I know when we picture an assassin, we think of like a lone wolf, someone shrouded in mystery on a deadly mission. But you're saying there were groups, entire societies devoted to assassination.
Yes, there have been. Throughout history, you find these groups, often driven by religious fanaticism or political extremism, who use violence to get what they want. They instill fear, advance their agendas through carefully planned murders.
That's pretty chilling. The idea of organized groups dedicated to taking lives so coldly and secretly, can you give an example, like a historical one?
One of the most infamous is the Assassins. They were around in Persia and Syria during the Middle Ages. They were an offshoot of Shia Islam, the Ismaili branch, led by this charismatic guy named Hassani Saba.
Hassani Saba. Sounds like a name out of a history book.
He established a stronghold in this mountain fortress called Alamut. The place was so well defended it became legendary.
Alamut. The name itself sounds like something out of a fantasy novel.
It does, doesn't it? And from this fortress, the assassins launched their reign of terror, targeting political and religious enemies. They really shook up the Islamic world. They were masters of espionage, infiltration. Their reputation for ruthlessness was no joke. Even their name, assassin, is now a synonym for political violence.
So what drove them? Was it just power? Or was there an ideology behind it?
It was complicated, a mix of religious beliefs and political ambitions. They believed they were fighting for a just cause. And Hassani Saba, he was a master propagandist. He instilled fanatical devotion in his followers, convinced them their actions were not just justified, but divinely ordained.
So it was ideology, intimidation, and charisma all wrapped up in this one powerful leader.
Exactly. And their name, assassins, it's wrapped in legend too. It's believed to come from the Arabic word hashishin, which means hashish eaters. There are stories, probably exaggerated, about how they used hashish to, like, heighten awareness or reward their followers with visions of paradise. Just another way to ensure loyalty and willingness to carry out those deadly missions.
Wait, so they were using drugs as part of their thing, like initiation or training? That's wild.
It's possible, although historians debate how much hashish actually played a role. But the legend definitely adds to their mystique, contributes to their fearsome reputation.
It's both fascinating and scary, how a secret society could use religious zeal, politics, and maybe even drugs to get what they wanted. But were there other groups, maybe closer to home, that did similar stuff? Used violence and intimidation, operated in the secrecy, using fear as a weapon.
Unfortunately, yes. And when we look at American history, one group stands out as a truly chilling example: the Ku Klux Klan.
The KKK. That name is just synonymous with hate and violence, a really dark part of American history. I have to admit, though, I don't know that much about their origins or their history.
It's a history that's important to understand, even if it's painful. The Klan has popped up at different points in U.S. history. Each time, it's fueled by this toxic mix of racism, xenophobia, and a twisted sense of patriotism. It's not one single organization with a continuous history. It's more like a movement, resurfacing in different forms over time, adapting to the social and political climate, but always clinging to its core beliefs: white supremacy and racial hatred.
So it's not one group, but like a recurring phenomenon, a ghost that keeps coming back to haunt America.
That's a great way to put it. The first Klan emerged after the Civil War, during Reconstruction. It was a time of huge upheaval in the South, as they tried to deal with the end of slavery and integrating African Americans into society. Many white Southerners felt threatened by these changes, and the Klan emerged as a backlash, a violent one, a way to reassert white supremacy and terrorize black citizens.
So it was a reaction to the progress being made towards racial equality, an attempt to turn back the clock, keep the old power structure in place.
Exactly. The first Klan was basically a vigilante group using violence and intimidation to terrorize black communities, keep black people from participating in politics. They wore those hooded robes, burned crosses, carried out lynchings, all designed to instill fear and undermine the progress that was being made.
A true reign of terror aimed at silencing and disempowering Black Americans. Shows how fragile progress can be. How quickly things can go bad when fear and prejudice take over.
That's a crucial point. And it's important to remember that the first Klan was eventually suppressed by the federal government. But the ideology, the hate, that didn't disappear. It went underground, waiting for the right moment to come back.
And it did come back, right? The Klan had a resurgence in the 20th century.
That's right. In the early 1900s, fueled by this wave of xenophobia and anti-immigrant sentiment, the Klan exploded back onto the scene. And this time, their targets expanded. It wasn't just black people anymore. It was immigrants, Catholics, Jews, anyone they saw as a threat to their vision of a white Protestant America.
So they became even more exclusionary, even more hateful.
Exactly. And the second Klan, it was more organized than the first. They had a hierarchy, elaborate rituals, even their own lingo, all designed to create a sense of belonging and also to hide their hateful agenda. They had titles like Grand Wizard and Exalted Cyclops, names meant to evoke power and mystique.
It's chilling how they use secrecy and ritual to build this sense of community, all while promoting hate and division.
And their influence, it went way beyond the South. They had chapters all over the country. At their peak, they had millions of members, even infiltrated law enforcement and politics.
It's hard to believe that such a group could be so widespread in the United States.
It's a dark reminder of the prejudices that have existed in this country, and how easily those prejudices can be exploited by charismatic leaders and hateful rhetoric. But this resurgence was also short-lived. Scandals, infighting, and growing awareness of their hateful ideology led to their decline. By the mid-20th century, they were largely out of the picture, though sadly not completely gone.
That's what I was wondering. Do they still exist today? I know we still see news reports about Klan rallies and stuff, so it's clearly not a dead ideology.
You're right. The Klan is a shadow of its former self now, fragmented and much less influential. But there are still these small, scattered groups holding on to those hateful beliefs. It's a reminder that we have to stay vigilant. We can't let our guard down against hate and division.
It's a sobering thought, but it's also important to remember that not all conspiracy theories are baseless. Sometimes what was once dismissed as paranoia or, crazy talk turns out to be true.
Absolutely. History's full of examples where fringe theories were later proven true, exposing government cover-ups, corporate greed, shocking abuses of power.
Hold on, are you saying sometimes the conspiracy theorists are right? Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction?
Sometimes, yes. And those cases are a powerful reminder that we can't just dismiss every conspiracy theory as nonsense. We have to be discerning, think critically, and be willing to follow the evidence, even if it makes us uncomfortable or challenges what we think we know.
Okay, I'm convinced. Give me an example. Tell me about a conspiracy theory that turned out to be true. Something that will really make me rethink things.
One of the most horrifying examples is the Tuskegee syphilis study. It was conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service from 1932 to 1972. The details are shocking, and it really shows how easily ethical boundaries can be crossed, even in the name of science.
The Tuskegee syphilis study. I've heard the name, but I don't know the details. What happened?
The study involved hundreds of black men in Macon County, Alabama. They were denied treatment for syphilis so researchers could study how the disease progressed.
You're kidding. They intentionally withheld treatment, even after penicillin became available as a cure in the 1940s.
I wish I were kidding. They told these men they were getting free health care, but they were given placebos or ineffective treatments while the researchers just watched as the disease ravaged their bodies.
That's just barbaric. How could that happen in the United States?
It's a dark chapter in our history, no doubt. It exposes the racism and inequality that have been woven into our society. The study went on for 40 years. It wasn't until a whistleblower went to the press in 1972 that the truth came out. There was a huge public outcry, congressional hearings, and finally a formal apology from President Clinton in 1997.
It's a shocking example of how powerful institutions can abuse people, especially vulnerable populations, and they did it all in the name of research and progress.
It reminds us that even in a country that values freedom and justice, there are dark undercurrents, and the pursuit of knowledge can be twisted for terrible purposes. It also shows that conspiracy theories, while often wrong, can sometimes be a warning sign. They can alert us to real injustices happening right in front of us.
Okay, so the Tuskegee study, that's a clear example of a real conspiracy. But are there others, maybe not as horrific, but still shocking, that show how blurry the line between conspiracy theory and reality can be?
Oh, absolutely. Another one that comes to mind is the Ford Pinto memo.
The Ford Pinto, wasn't that the car that was known for exploding if it got rear-ended?
Yep, that's the one. And the story behind it is a chilling example of corporate greed and how little they cared about human life. In the early 70s, Ford was rushing to get the Pinto out to compete with those smaller, fuel-efficient imports, the ones flooding the American market. But during crash tests, engineers found a flaw in the design. The gas tank was prone to rupturing and exploding if the car got hit from behind.
So they knew the car was dangerous, knew people could die in an accident.
They did. And what's even more shocking is that Ford executives, instead of fixing it, they decided to do a cost-benefit analysis.
Wait, a cost-benefit analysis on human lives?
I know, right? They actually calculated how much it would cost to deal with lawsuits and settlements from deaths and injuries versus how much it would cost to recall and fix the cars. And they decided it was cheaper to just pay out the settlements.
That's cold-blooded.
It is. And it was all laid out in this memo that became infamous. The Ford Pinto memo. It really shows you the callous indifference of some corporations when it comes to profit over people.
So what happened? Did they get away with it? Did people actually die because of that decision?
Sadly, yes. Many people were killed or hurt in Pinto fires. But eventually the memo was leaked to the press. And there was public outrage, a wave of lawsuits. Ford was forced to recall millions of Pintos and make safety improvements.
It's a case where public pressure and the media forced a corporation to be accountable. Shows how important investigative journalism is.
Absolutely. It also shows that even in a system that favors corporations and the wealthy, the truth can come out. Those who abuse their power can be held accountable.
So you mentioned earlier that conspiracy theories can sometimes point to real injustices, and I'm starting to see how that's possible. The Tuskegee study, the Ford Pinto, those are examples of real conspiracies. People in power making decisions that hurt others, often in secret. But how do we tell the difference between these real conspiracies and the more outlandish ones? The ones about aliens and reptilian overlords and all that?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do we navigate this world of information and misinformation? How do we tell fact from fiction? Develop those critical thinking skills?
I think that's a perfect place to pause. Stay tuned, folks. In part 3, we'll explore the wilder side of conspiracy theories. We're talking flat earthers, moon landing deniers, even folks who believe Elvis is alive and well. It's going to be a trip.
Can't wait. And we'll also talk about how to hone those critical thinking skills, how to be more discerning in this age of information overload. Because let's face it, separating fact from fiction is more important now than ever.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've spent the last two parts uncovering some pretty heady stuff, from the psychology of conspiracy thinking to real-life cover-ups and corruption. It's been fascinating, but gotta admit, I'm kind of ready for something a little lighter now.
Yeah, I hear you. We've definitely been in some dark corners of human history and behavior. But as promised, we're going to shift gears now and check out some of those more outlandish and entertaining conspiracy theories out there, the ones that make you scratch your head and maybe chuckle a bit.
All right, bring on the weirdness. Hit me with your best shot.
Okay, well, how about this one? The flat Earth theory.
Wait, seriously? People actually believe the Earth is flat still?
You'd be surprised. The Flat Earth Society, they're still going strong despite, centuries of scientific evidence proving them wrong. They insist the Earth is a flat disk surrounded by a giant ice wall that keeps us all from falling off.
I mean, come on, we have pictures from space, satellites, GPS. How can they ignore all that?
They say it's all fake, a big conspiracy to trick everyone. They say NASA, fake space missions, doctors' images, that the whole scientific community is in on it.
That's wild. It's like they live in a totally different reality.
It really is. And it shows you how powerful confirmation bias can be. That's the tendency to look for information that supports your beliefs while ignoring anything that contradicts it. Flat earthers have built this whole worldview based on cherry-picked evidence and reinterpreting data, and within that world, it all makes sense to them.
It's a good reminder that we all have biases, and we need to be aware of them when we're looking at information, especially when it comes to, basic stuff like the shape of the planet.
Absolutely. Critical thinking is key, especially these days when we're constantly bombarded with information from every direction. But okay, let's move on from flat earthers and delve into another theory, equally bizarre and maybe even a little creepier. The reptilian humanoids theory.
Reptilian humanoids. Okay, now you're just messing with me.
I wish I were. This one, it's been popularized by David Icke, a British conspiracy theorist. He claims that shape-shifting reptilian humanoids are secretly controlling the world.
Shape-shifting reptilian humanoids. So, like lizard people walking among us disguised as regular folks.
That's the idea. Icke says these reptilians are hiding in plain sight. World leaders, celebrities, royalty, even your neighbor could be one. They're pulling the strings, manipulating everything for their own evil purposes.
Sounds like a B-movie plot. What kind of evidence is there for something like that?
Well, Icke and his followers point to ancient myths and legends about reptilian beings. They also look at physical characteristics of certain people, like their eyes or their mannerisms, and say that's proof.
So basically, they're taking old stories, misinterpreting how people look, and turning it into this whole narrative about reptilians taking over.
Exactly. And while it might seem harmless to some, the reptilian humanoids theory can actually be dangerous. It's often tied to anti-Semitic ideas, and it can really fuel paranoia and distrust.
It's a good reminder that even the most out-there conspiracy theories can have real-world consequences, especially when they tap into existing prejudices.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, let's change gears again. How about a theory that's more tragic and maybe even more intriguing? The theories about Princess Diana's death.
Ah, yes, Princess Diana. Her death was a global tragedy, no question. Not surprising that it sparked so many conspiracy theories.
It was such a shock. And for a lot of people, it was hard to accept that someone so beloved could die in such a seemingly random way. And when there aren't clear answers, conspiracy theories rush in to fill the gap.
So what are some of the theories? What do people believe really happened?
The most common one is that it wasn't an accident, but an assassination, planned and executed by some powerful, shadowy group. The list of potential suspects is long and varied, ranging from the British royal family to MI6, even some international organizations.
But the official investigations concluded it was an accident. Drunk driver, speeding, that kind of thing.
Right, but conspiracy theorists point to what they say are inconsistencies in the evidence, witnesses who contradict the official story, even the way the royal family acted afterwards. All this, they say, proves something more sinister was going on.
It's like they're crafting a narrative, picking and choosing evidence to support their conclusion, ignoring anything that doesn't fit.
Exactly. And the fact that people are still so fascinated by Diana's death, it speaks to her enduring popularity, the distrust of authority, and our deep need to find meaning in tragedy. It's like we just can't accept that sometimes bad things just happen.
Right. It's almost like we need there to be a reason, an explanation, even if it's a dark one.
It's understandable. It's a way of making sense of something senseless. But it also shows that conspiracy theories can be comforting. They offer a sense of control in a world that can feel chaotic.
Okay, let's shift gears one more time. What about this theory? That Hurricane Katrina, the one that devastated New Orleans, was actually a man-made disaster.
That's a controversial one. Of course, hurricanes are natural events caused by complex weather patterns. But people who believe this theory say the government intentionally breached the levees in New Orleans. They say it was a way to flood those African-American neighborhoods, basically sacrificing those communities to save the richer, whiter parts of the city.
Wow, so it's a theory rooted in racial politics, distrust of the government, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It suggests the government deliberately targeted black communities, let them be destroyed by the flood while protecting more privileged areas. It plays on the history of racial injustice in the U.S., and it's fueled by that deep distrust that many people, especially people of color, have towards authority.
It's a serious accusation, but is there any proof?
Not really. Investigations have shown that those levee breaches were caused by engineering flaws, poor maintenance, and just the sheer force of the hurricane itself. But for people who believe this theory, that lack of evidence is just more proof of a cover-up.
So they're seeing what they want to see, even if it's not there.
It's a reminder that conspiracy theories often exploit real inequalities and grievances to spread misinformation and create division.
It's a sad but important point. We got to be aware of those dynamics. But okay, let's keep going. We've got flat earthers, reptilian overlords, government-controlled hurricanes. What other strange beliefs are out there?
Well, how about the one that says the Apollo moon landings were faked?
What? Seriously? People don't believe we landed on the moon.
It might sound crazy, but yeah, there's a whole group of people who believe the moon landings were staged by NASA, to win the space race against the Soviets.
But we have pictures, video, moon rocks. How can they deny all that?
They say it's all fake, an elaborate illusion. They point to things like inconsistencies in the photos, the lack of stars in the background, even the way the American flag waves in the supposedly airless environment on the moon. Proof, they say, that it was all filmed on a soundstage.
Wow. They really go to great lengths to reinterpret things.
They do. And it's a classic example of confirmation bias in action. They've created this whole counter-narrative, and within that story, their beliefs make perfect sense.
It shows that critical thinking isn't just about evaluating the evidence, it's also about recognizing your own biases, being willing to question what you think you know.
Exactly. And speaking of questioning what we know, what about the hot dog bun conspiracy?
Okay, a hot dog conspiracy. I'm intrigued.
This one's about the fact that hot dogs usually come in packs of 10, but buns come in packs of 8. Conspiracy theorists say it's intentional. It's a tactic by the manufacturers to force us to buy more of both.
So it's Big Hot Dog trying to manipulate us.
Yep. You always end up with extra hot dogs or extra buns, which of course makes you buy more to get that perfect ratio.
Pretty clever, if it's true.
Right.
But is there any evidence to back that up?
Well, manufacturers say the different packaging sizes are just about efficiency and what consumers want. They say it's cheaper to package them that way.
So it's a battle between Big Hot Dog and hungry consumers. Who will win?
It's a conspiracy for the ages. But in the end, it's a pretty harmless one, right? Gives us something to chuckle about and maybe makes us think about those hidden forces shaping our everyday lives.
It's true. Not all conspiracy theories have to be dark and scary. Some are just fun to think about.
Right. And speaking of fun, let's wrap up with a theory that combines sci-fi with a good dose of paranoia. The belief that aliens are secretly working with the government.
Aliens and the government in cahoots. Now, that's a classic.
It is, and it's been around forever, fueled by those UFO sightings, alien abduction stories, and of course that whole Area 51 mystery.
Yes, Area 51. The top secret government base where they supposedly keep all the captured aliens and their tech.
Exactly. People who believe this theory say the government has been hiding the truth about extraterrestrial life for who knows how long. They say they're working with aliens, maybe even letting them experiment on humans.
Straight out of the X-Files, but is there any actual evidence to support this?
The government denies everything, of course, and while there have been some unexplained events in the sky, most can be explained as natural phenomena or misidentified aircraft. But for those who want to believe, those denials are just proof of a cover-up.
It's like they're taking the unknown and turning it into this narrative about government secrecy and alien control.
That's it. It taps into our fascination with aliens and our distrust of the government. A powerful combo that's fueled so many books, movies, TV shows. But hey, that's the power of a good story, right?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the origins of conspiracy theories to the psychology behind them, from real-life cover-ups to some truly wild stuff. It's been a fascinating journey. I feel like I have a better understanding of why people gravitate towards these explanations, even if they're not always, well, grounded in reality.
It's been a great exploration, and I think the important thing to remember is that even though conspiracy theories are often misguided, they can teach us a lot about ourselves, our fears, our hopes, and our need to find meaning in a world that can often feel confusing and out of control.
So as we wrap things up, what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What should they keep in mind as they navigate this world of information, misinformation, truth, and fiction?
I'd say the most important thing is to be a critical thinker. Question your assumptions, check your sources, and don't be afraid to challenge what you hear, even if it comes from someone you trust. In this age of information overload, being able to think for yourself, separate fact from fiction, it's more important than ever.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of conspiracy theories and secret societies. It's been a wild ride, and we hope you've enjoyed it. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds open.
And remember, the truth is out there, somewhere.